Today we're going to take out the factory radio and replace it with an aftermarket radio. First thing you want to do is disconnect the negative terminal, which we've already done, and now we're going to take off this bezel around the radio. So I'm going to use a trim tool, but you can use anything as long as you're careful and you don't damage the plastic. And if you don't have a trim tool, if you have the vents, you can sort of tug and pull on it, but ideally you'd have a tool like a screwdriver with a softened edge or something that you could get under here and just sort of pull on the trim just so you can pull it away from the dash. And so we're going to pull it out. Now these vents up here have a cowling that go backwards over the air intake for these vents, so you just have to tilt this forward and then out. Now you can spin it to the top just to get it out of the way, or if you want you can just disconnect the electrical connectors, and they just have a push button that you push in and pull out. In some cases easier said than done. There we go. So we'll put this to the side. So the radio, now with the bezel removed, has got 4 screws, 2 on each side, and they're a regular Phillips screw. So we're just going to take a magnetic screwdriver with a Phillips bit in it, and we're just going to unscrew these Phillips screws. Now the magnetic screwdriver is helpful because it'll help hold on to the screws so you don't lose them. So we'll take the 2 out on the right hand side, making sure we keep them with a magnetic screwdriver, and then the 2 on the other side. One and 2. There we go. So all 4 screws are out. So now we can take the radio and just pull it out. Now on the back it's got an antenna wire, so we'll pull that out. And then we've also got wiring for the speakers and for the power. So when we pull out those connectors, just by pushing in on the connector release and pulling out, the radio is free. Now in this case, we're going to want to keep these brackets because we're going to install them on the new radio and to help us install it inside the dash. Okay, so I've taken the new radio's harness and I've cut all the ends and stripped them, and now I'm just putting these cheap butt connectors on here. And what you want to do is you just want to take off enough of the shielding to leave enough copper so that you can get a good crimp on there. So you take these butt connectors and you just slide them on the twisted wire, and you just slide it on top, and you take your crimper tool and you just give it a good crimp and just push as hard as you can. Now obviously this isn't the best crimp in the world. You do like soldering if at all possible, but I mean this is for a Corolla radio, this isn't for a space shuttle, so this should be fine. But you just want to make sure that you've taken off enough of the insulation off the wire so that you can get a good crimp on it. And I usually double crimp, although I know you're not really supposed to. And then when you're done, just give the back connectors a tug just to make sure that you did a good job. And in this car I actually don't have rear speakers, it just has the front speakers, so I've taped off the rear speaker wires on this aftermarket harness because we're not going to be using them. Okay, now with the factory harness, we're going to cut off the harness from the factory radio because we need these wires to crimp into our aftermarket radio harness. Now remember, the blue and the yellow, that's the power wire, so make sure the battery is disconnected because if you ground it anywhere, this is going to spark. So we're going to cut that off. If you're going to reuse this for something someday, you're going to want to leave a little bit of wire, but the odds of reusing this is slim and none. The aftermarket market for used Corolla stereos is pretty soft, so I think you're fine to just cut it off. So we're just going to snip them, snip, snip, snippity snip, snip. There we go. So what we're going to do now is we're going to strip these wires. So again, I can't emphasize this enough. Make sure the battery is disconnected, because if you take the insulation or the shielding off of the power wire and it touches anything else, it's going to short out and you might blow a fuse. and then you'll have to figure out which fuse blew and replace it. If you just take the battery and disconnect it, then you don't have to worry about it. So I'll go through and strip these wires now. Alright, now we're going to start crimping the aftermarket harness to the stripped wires from the OEM harness. So, according to my cell phone here, the main power wire or the battery wire is the blue-yellow on here. So we're going to take blue-yellow and we're going to crimp that to yellow. So we'll get our yellow from our wiring harness here, stuff it in, make sure the wire's nice and twisty, stick it into the butt connector, make sure you have it all the way in, and then we're going to crimp it. Okay, and once you're crimped, make sure you give it a quick tug test, and then we'll go on to the next one. So our switched power is going to be gray from the factory harness, so that's here, and that's going to be mated to the red wire, which is here. So we're going to take gray, stuff it into the red connector for the red wire, and we're going to crimp it. Okay, and then quick tug test. Okay, and the next one is ground, which is brown. So here's brown. And that goes into ground, which is here. Just want to make sure that these wires are out of the way. There we go. Okay, brown into the connector. Okay. And then illumination is green. Another thing to note is to make sure all the wires are about the same length, because if they're all different lengths, it makes this already awkward step even more awkward. And on the Corolla, we're quite fortunate that there's a lot of access here. On other cars, this access is a nightmare, and I've had cases where I've needed to use special short wire crimpers to do the job. Okay, and then we're going to work on the front right speaker. So that's light green, or sorry, front right plus, that's green, and that's going to go to the gray wire. Now remember, the gray with black, or any wire with the black stripe, is going to be negative. So front right positive is going to go to the gray wire, and then to light green. So just make sure you don't have the gray with stripe, it's just a plain gray wire. Okay. Stuff that in there and crimp. Okay, give it a pull, it's good. Okay, and then the blue wire is the front right negative, so that would be gray with a stripe, which would be here. it in, crimp it on, crimp, good, tug. Okay, and now we're going to go to the front left speaker. So front left positive is going to be this pink one, and that's going to be a plain white wire with no stripe. So that's this one here. And quick tug. And then the last wire, since I only have 2 front speakers in this car, is going to be front left minus. So that's going to be the white with the black stripe, and that mates to a purple wire, which is this guy here. Crimp and crimp. Okay, now when we took the radio out, you'll remember that this was plugged into the back of the radio. This would be for the rear speakers, but this car doesn't have rear speakers, so we're not going to mess with that. And with the aftermarket harness, I've taped off the rear speaker wires because I'm not going to bother wiring them up since I don't have rear speakers in this car. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take the factory radio and take the brackets off of it so we can put the radio in the same factory location. So we're just going to take a Phillips screwdriver and take off the factory screws that hold the factory brackets on. So we're going to take the 2 off on the right side. And then on the new radio, it fortunately comes with pre-drilled and tapped holes for different types of vehicles. And fortunately, Toyota is one of those vehicles that it has holes for. So these brackets will fit right into the new radio. So here's the bracket out of the factory radio, and here's the new radio that we're going to install. And you can see that there's pre-drilled screw holes and a locating dot right here on the radio. And you can see that that matches up perfectly with the original radio. So the angle of the bracket is correct, and if you compare it to the old radio, you can see how it's perfect. Flush with the bottom, slight angle, and locating pin right there. So here we are with the aftermarket radio, flush with the bottom, and locating pin right there. So we'll take the screw, locate the bracket in the correct location on the side of the new radio, and then we'll just install the factory bracket with the screws. There we go, we'll screw it down. There we are, and then I'll repeat with the other side. Okay, now that we have the OEM brackets installed on the aftermarket radio, in this case I think we're going to take this bezel off. I don't think that's required. So we'll put that to the side. And then we're going to take our wiring harness here that we wired up to the factory wiring. We're going to plug that into the back of the radio. And then we're going to remember to take our antenna wire and plug that into the back of the radio. And then we're going to want to make sure that our wiring for the hazard lights is out of the way. And then we're going to slide the radio with its wiring into the radio slot. There, and there's some locating pins here and here which will locate the radio into the dash. Now all we need to do is put in the factory screws and install the radio. So let's do that. Right, now with the aftermarket radio located in the dash, we're now going to tighten down the factory screws to install the radio. There's one. And again, I'm using a magnetic screwdriver, so it's a little easier to hold the screws when putting them into these holes. And we're not going to tighten them all the way down because we want to make sure that the radio is free to locate itself. Okay, and one last one. Okay, and now we will tighten them down. And again, don't go ridiculously tight, just make it nice and snug. Alright, now that the radio is installed, I'm going to take off the faceplate and we're going to install the bezel back onto the dash. So I'm going to reconnect the hazard lights harness and the blue harness here for the clock that this car doesn't have. And then we're going to slide the bezel in, remembering that this hole here has to fit over top of the vents in the back. So we're going to tilt it up slightly. There, and then once it's homed, we just click it into place. There we go. Then we can take our faceplate, make sure it fits properly. And there we go, that fits perfectly. Okay, I've just reconnected the battery for the car, so we're going to turn on accessory power and turn on the radio and see how everything works. Okay, so we have lights, that's good. And there we go. So there you go, that's the installation of aftermarket radio into a 2002 to 1998 Toyota Corolla. Job done. Thanks for watching.